Good morning. You're listening to Drinking Socially, the official Untappd podcast.
Your inside look into what's happening in the Untappd community and the world of beer.
I'm John, and I'm grateful to be back with my friend, my drinking buddy, and co-host with two more beers to share with you today. Today's Beer 101 will be focusing on malt, and I expect Harrison to give us some great stories, just as he did with the hops in the last episode. But also, we're updating Mount Beermore with the third of 4 beers for season 3, and I'm really excited about this one.
Fantastic. And I'm Harrison. Malt. Today, we're going to shed some light on how slight adjustments of a beer's grain bill can give you complete different results. If hops are the jazz hands of a beer, then malt is its sequence tracksuit. So let's get deep and find out more about how and why well, we drink some great beers that highlight the magic of malt along the way. But first, as a reminder, Drinking Socially is released every other Wednesday morning. It can be found at podcast.untappd.com.
How do I follow that? Or wherever you listen to podcasts.
That's right.
That was an outstanding intro, Harrison.
Yeah, a lot of talk about a lot of fun dancing clothes.
You managed to tie jazz hands and sequence tracksuits into malt,
Somehow,
which is magical.
Just part of the magic. That's right, John.
Keep the magic going. How's your last couple of weeks been? It's been 2 weeks since we sat down. Have you drank anything cool? Done anything?
Yeah, we can jump
extraordinary or good?
Pretty straightforward. Nothing too crazy for me on the kind of weekend beers. I kind of took another trip down memory lane, which I guess if you drink enough beer is kind of inevitable all the time that you'll be having something that stirs up some memories. This one, though, went way back. I had both Mama's Little Yellow Pills and Dale's Pale Ale from Oscar Blues recently. Got their new variety can pack and have been working my way through that. And it's just great. They did a rebrand not too long ago. All their cans look fantastic. And the beer still tastes as good as ever. But it's been a little bit since I had both of them, and just kind of a reminder of how good both those beers are overall. And then, how drinkable they are, how for the time of year, it's an awesome combo to go from kind of Pilsner to Pale Ale and back and forth. So I did that for a good bit last weekend, but just kind of reminded me, just early days of my craft beer journey, drink those beers a lot, and reminded me of something that'll be coming up a little bit later in the Mount Beermore section. Kind of jog my memory of some beers that really set me down the path that I'm on today. I'm very thankful for. And what also reminded me, and I'm kind of giving away perhaps what this beer is going to be, I'm going to talk about and add to the Beermore today, was Chris Wagner in the Facebook group asked about Wee Heavy. He was like, what do you guys, episode 14, can you find a Wee Heavy somewhere? And we tried. As of now, it is summer in North Carolina and all over the place in the Northern Hemisphere, but in North Carolina too. So not a beer you see a lot on the shelf right now, unfortunately. So we tried. No luck, but again, we'll be talking about, specifically talking about some Wee Heavies today, because I love that style, which we'll dive into a bit. So good on you, Chris, for kind of just giving me the nudge I needed to make Mount Beermore kind of a new addition to it. But what about you, John? What'd you getting into recently?
The beer that probably got me, I think, the most check-in comments over the last couple of weeks is it was called it's Apple Crumble County Fair Cobbler, which I had to write down to get that sequence correct. Apple Crumble County Fair Cobbler by Wiley Roots out in Greeley, Colorado. I got that from beer delivery service, and it was honestly, I think it was listed as a sour, and you could tell that was in there, but the apple crumble part, it was like drinking like apple pie memories, which is really cool. And I love when I see some of my Untappd friends kind of say, I've had that, or what'd you think? And there was a comment on there that was just like, it was just gold advice from an Untappd user, Maori Mobster, which is also a really cool name. And Maori Mobster, you drink some amazing beers. Your check-in feed makes me jealous more often than not. But the advice was, when in doubt, buy a 4 pack, and that was so true. I always tend to go with a single, and then you drink it, and I wish I had another. Sometimes
Yep.
you win, but that was a really cool check in. You mentioned Chris, who suggested a wee heavy. It's a favorite of mine. We also had a great "Would you rather" suggestion come in
Mm.
from Greg. We're going to be answering it on the next episode 15. There was some people talking about Greg's question in the Facebook group, and it's a really good one. So I'm excited to answer that one on the next episode. Make sure you send in if you have any "Would you rather's" that'll spark some fun conversation. Get with us on the
Yeah.
Facebook group.
That's right. That's right. And the last thing that I saw that I loved and laughed about for a while was Kevin Kelly popped in the Facebook group. Which '80s movie is your favorite? And has a list of 12 or so movies here that uh, that are all classics, starting with Breakfast Club, The Goonies, Beetlejuice, Gremlins, The Outsiders, Footloose, Labyrinth, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Dirty Dancing, The Lost Boys, Ghostbusters, and Back to the Future. And that got a lot of people talking, as it should, and got John and I thinking too, and kind of rolling around this old chestnut to see where we landed.
Definitely. There's a lot of beer content in the Facebook group now, which of course is largely the reason people show up there. But this post from Kevin, as soon as I mentioned it to Harrison, we were like, we should talk about that,
That's
and we
right.
have been for the last couple days.
That's right. How could you not? I know.
um, Harrison, I expect you to have a hard time picking just one. I regard you as kind of an '80s movie aficionado.
Mm.
Is there one of those that jumps out at you if you had to choose a favorite?
There is, and it's tough. It's like, right, like picking your favorite beer or whatever. Insert your own picking favorite difficult analogy, but there's plenty of them out there. And this is like the cream of the crop of '80s movies. So, right, to pick one would seem difficult. However, I happen to think that not only is the movie that I chose the best movie of this bunch, I think it's the best movie ever made, period, John. It's the greatest, and we can get into what is a movie and what is a film, not today, because I do see them as different things, but the greatest movie of all time is Back to the Future, and it's on that list. So that movie changed my life in many ways. I still love it. It's the perfect movie if you like movies or want to make your own movies. That's the one they kind of point you to in film school as one of the ones to read about and learn about what makes a really great movie. It launched a lot of people's careers. It's just a great story. Um, and easily one of my top 5 movies of all time. So yeah, that again, it's tough. You got Gremlins, Goonies, there, Beetlejuice, like fair, all these great movies. But I mean, I'm Back to the Future all the way. But where were you? What was kind of running through your mind when you looked at this stuff, John?
It was I should watch these movies again. It's been a
Yeah,
while.
yeah,
You're right. Back to the Future is amazing. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is obviously, all of them are worthy of being on this 12 kind of post question that Kevin put out there. But for me, the one I would pick is Goonies.
hmm
It doesn't mirror my life growing up, but for the same reason I love Social Distortion as a band. Like, I feel like the Goonies reminds me so much of.
right,
It was
right,
probably only 2 days in my childhood that I was able to like get out of chores and everything, but
right,
watching the
right.
Goonies makes me feel like a kid again.
Yep,
Thanks for sending us down memory and even greatest film history lane.
that's
Uh,
right,
Kevin, thanks for the question. That was awesome.
indeed.
You know what goes great with '80s movies, Harrison?
Besides leg warmers and Zumba classes, what, John? Tell me. Yoga Pilates, whatever it is.
Yoga
Yeah.
lattes, leg warmers, and of course, beer. Um,
Ah.
so those of you that listen to the Drinking Socially podcast for beer, hopefully enjoyed the '80s movie rant. I think that was fun. But we've got a beer, and so the two beers we picked for this episode were uh, ideally just ways that we could kind of think about or talk about malt's role in beer with episode 14 focusing on malt for Beer 101. So the first one, um, as soon as we talked about malt, Harrison said, "I wish we could get an ESB." And this was actually the first style of beer that I ever homebrewed, air quotes.
Hmm.
Um, so this beer is titled ESB. It's made from Green Man Brewery, who's out in Asheville. We just had a couple of people tour Asheville in the Facebook group. It's an
Oh, that's right.
awesome beer city. They've been there for a long time. They list it as an ESB, and the first question I want to ask Harrison is it extra special? Is it extra strong? Is it English? We'll cover that maybe, and I don't know if there is an answer, but it comes
Yeah.
in at 5.5 ABV. They list 32 IBUs, and the notes they provide are that it's a malty amber ale boasting rich toasted caramel flavor. Green Man ESB is an award winning brew from the brewery. It's a blend of authentic British malts and hops, which create a nutty aroma, full body, and a sweet finish. And their warning is prepare yourself for a truly exceptional interpretation of a traditional English style. I've had this beer before. It
Hmm.
is it's for me it's Green Man's flagship,
Yep.
and the one I find on the store shelf pretty often as well in and around North Carolina. So I see
Ooh,
Harrison's a little bit
ooh.
ahead of me on the pour.
I
I'm
know, right?
excited to catch up.
I know exactly. But yeah, and while you're doing that, yeah, this is as we kind of covered before. I moved to North Carolina about 4 years ago, and this Green Man was one of the breweries, the first breweries people told me to check out when I moved here. And their porter and ESB were like the beers they said you got to try. And indeed, they've been doing this for a while. Um, and yeah, this is yeah again, as John said, one of the beers they're really known for, and it right away, and it's interesting. So on the bottle and their website and everything, it says Green Man ESB a special amber ale. So they're the year and a half later today is also an amber ale. So and I would kind of tell anyone who's never had a ESB before, if they ask what's an ESB, I'd kind of be like, it's like an amber ale. It's the British version of an amber ale. It's a lighter pale ale. So the comparison is warranted there. There are some slight differences, but I'm going to jump into this and whoo, see
I
see
jumped
what
right
happens.
in.
Good for you.
I think they were so amazingly accurate with that toasted caramel flavor.
Ooh,
This beer it's sweet.
mm,
It's clean. It's I don't know. I can just litter off a whole bunch of those like check-in taste
I know.
profiles that you see when you go to check into this beer. But the thing that sings to me in the nose and in the taste is like brown butter, toasted
Hmm.
caramel, that like
Hmm.
that sea salt cookie that you think
Right.
is healthier than a chocolate chip.
Right. Sure. Yeah, so for me, John, this it really kind of like splits right down the line between an American amber ale and an ESB, where I'm getting well, I mean, they both styles kind of have like a nice malty kind of bread character to it. There's a little bit of a toasted thing happening for both. Excuse me. Really, the body is very similar too. Um, I mean, they're so such two similar styles. I would argue the difference really in those beers is more the water than anything else. And perhaps the yeast maybe a little bit. But yeah, I get the same thing you are. I'm getting some kind of toasted caramel notes. There's like a biscuity kind of almost like yeah, buttered toast thing happening in there. Um, man, it smells great. It's yeah, it smells like a pub. It smells like a proper English pub or a brew day. I mean, this the malts they use in this beer are some of the best kind of specialty malts out there. Whether it and it's a lot of biscuit malt, which is kind of like a just as it implies, not a lot, enough to have it show up.
Delicious.
Yeah, just kind of that like that note, that like freshly baked bread note. But it's like a darker bread. It's like a multi-grain bread. It's there's more going on there, just like a loaf of white bread, if you will. So this is awesome. This is delicious. Dang.
Yeah, and this beer itself is it's not I mean, it's not dark, right? I can't say that it's dark, like a stout would be, but
No.
it's got more color than most of the beers we bring on to the show, or maybe more darkness. But once you hold it up, like if you get it in the light, I can see that amber color coming through as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Can
it's a
you
beautiful looking beer. Yeah.
I know we're gonna talk about malt heavily later on in the show, but Harrison, can you kind of break down maybe if I made this beer with a lighter malt, maybe one that wasn't roasted as dark, what would that just change the color for me, or how's that play into the way it works on flavor as well?
If you use like, yeah, lighter or just less specialty malt, probably like we will talk about this. We can kind of start now though, that there is changing the grain bill in a beer is like, changing the degree of a ship's heading by like a half a degree. Like it could end up in the Pacific or end up in Panama. If you're 100 miles away from your destination, just that one adjustment will send you so far, you know, far on a different course. So that's what malt does, and the kind of role it plays in a beer is you change a couple little things. I'm talking like 5 or 10 pounds in a 1,000 pound batch, a 1,000 pound grain bill. You take 5 or 10 pounds of especially malt away, and it's going to totally change how that beer works. So it's like a
Wow.
percentage,
Okay.
so it really and what it tastes like and all that stuff. Um, so yeah, so if you took away like some of the crystal malt or the Vienna malt or these slightly darker, more longer roasted, different kiln malts that add color and add some of those bread notes or tasting away from this and replace it with just like a British pale malt, it would lighten up the body and it would totally change the flavor of it. It's really, I mean, I as someone who brewed as long as I did, it's really becomes apparent when you're obviously dropping grain into a huge mill and that is going to become a beer that thousands of people drink. You obviously want to get it correct, and it was drilled into us early on that like not a pound more of this. If you like, not even like a gram more of this. Like, do not add more victory malt. Do not do it. If we run out of it or run out of another specialty malt, don't compensate it with victory malt. Just come to me and I'll tell you what to do. Was like I remember that would happen sometimes. You'd run out of a certain specialty malt and a beer be coming up, and what's the move? And it was rarely, if ever, add more specialty grains because they just become so powerful so quickly um, in uh, in a beer. So yeah, it changed a lot.
That's I the way you answered that almost makes me think of brewing a beer as like working in a bakery. In like obviously don't substitute salt for sugar or you don't have a bakery anymore.
Yeah.
But it leads me, and then I'll lay off malt, and then I know I want to go to Untapped and like kind of talk about this beer a little bit more. But I feel like, and maybe it's just the friends that I hang out with, but malt is kind of like, oh, that's a real malty beer or a malt
Right,
bomb. Like
right, right,
people
right.
people get excited when you double dry hop with a hop that no one
Sure.
can pronounce. No one really gets excited about biscuit malt and a perfect pH balance from enough acidulated malt. Like no one ever talks about malt, but it's really important to the way this beer tastes. Like,
Yeah.
this is a speculative question, but do you have any ideas to why malt isn't the hero that hops are?
It's probably just, I mean, in the U.S. and now all over the world, just it's kind of the hops reign supreme currently. It's just exciting, and there's a lot of innovation there. And if you're not trying that next hazy IPA, then you're missing out on something probably. And I don't know if it's also it's much. I would argue that um, in general, it's easier to like perceive a lot of flavors from a quadruple dry hop beer. There's a lot of stuff going on in there that attacks your tongue with that bitterness that you're kind of like forced to taste almost. Whereas malt is a much more nuanced experience, and so maybe it's just not as exciting right now to a lot of people. Um, but for me, I know for you, like if you're a huge stout fan, like we're probably saying nonsense, right? You're probably a huge malt. You are a huge malt fan. If
True,
you you
true.
know if you love stouts, you may just not know it yet. And it's also right. It's probably just like good old fashioned marketing. Like hops have cool names. Malt has names like Crystal 20 Lovabond, which doesn't mean anything and sounds like a science experiment that like I got to work to understand. So maybe there's like a slight barrier to entry there where you're like, I don't know what this means. I need to learn the color spectrum. I'll just drink this beer and move on. I don't know.
True. From a marketing perspective, any of you malters out there that may be listening, give me a brownie malt. Give me a
Oh,
chocolate
right,
blondie malt. Like
right. I know.
that's a trend I want in my
I know.
beers as well.
I know. And that's the funny thing about that is there is a malt called chocolate malt, but it's kind of like the whole Greenland Iceland thing. Greenland's covered in ice, Iceland's covered in the green stuff. Chocolate malt tastes like caramel, and caramel malts can taste like chocolate. So there's even like chocolate malt that could be your, right, the entry to malt's exciting everybody. You tell someone chocolate malt and they taste it and they're like, this doesn't taste like chocolate, and you've lost them again. So yeah, they're
Yep.
not, yeah, nothing, not doing any no favors there in enticing people in with easily agreeable things like chocolate, even
Like
on a malt
cool
called chocolate.
like we had Paul from the virtual festival, Paul
Hmm.
here from Decadent Ales, and I was amazed when he said that all
Yeah,
the chocolate flavor in his beer came from malt. I
yeah,
mean,
it's unreal. It was
that
so
was
fudgy.
incredible. Yes.
It was so fudgy, and there must be. I think there was some lactose in there too, which will like add to the body of a few uses because there are especially malts. Like some brown malts and some caramel malts, and I even think black patent, which is a kind of darker malt in like the right amount combined with some other specialty malts can create that fudge like flavor or that. But like I think what for me with that beer, what did it was that it was so fudge-y, like the consistency of it too made my brain go like, what in the world am I
Yes.
drinking? This tastes like liquid brownie batter, which was amazing. It was such a wild experience. Um, but yeah, that's a malt master. That's a guy who gets it and is like, in his world there, just making magical malt concoctions. So good on him. Keep doing it, please.
Now I just want to keep talking about chocolate malt beers and
I know
putting ice cream in your beers, but
exactly. See, there we go.
we're on Untapped and we're drinking Green Man's ESB. And I know, Harrison, you've had some friends that have checked into this beer. Any of them stand out to you? I've got my kind of friends feed pulled up.
Yeah,
So I'll begin with the first one. Maybe we always record when I'm hungry. Honestly, I think I'm always hungry, but
yeah,
a friend of mine from about a year ago, Jason, checked into this Green Man ESB at a venue called the Boundary House, and he gave it a rating, but he didn't give it a comment, so I can't really elaborate on what he thought of the taste. But what was really cool is like you can tell he's in a restaurant or a bar. He's got like a plate of food behind it and the check-in photo and
yep,
stuff. And
yep.
okay, so I'm hungry and I miss going out. Um, but I always think it's cool to kind of go back in time a year, 2 years, and see what friends had. And he was drinking it in North Carolina, which is kind of cool to see. What about you, Harrison?
Yeah, a couple people. I know Ian Maddox had it. Man, almost a little more than a year ago now. Had a nitro version of it, which is pretty cool. At
Wow.
actual, yeah, Green Man at the brewery itself at their Green Mansion location, which is pretty cool. And then a lot of people kind of saying, similar to brown ales they've had, and a solid ESB, things like that. Which it is. It's great. Like it's exactly what you want in this style, but you can kind of tell that as we were just discussing, like the world of malts can be blended with for a lot of people kind of taste similar flavors in a lot of different beers on the malt side of things, and so it was pretty evident in my recent friend activity feed on Untappd, but everyone's loving it and really enjoying it, and yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it rates. It's got almost 50,000 check-ins. It holds above 3.5. It's 3.69
Yeah,
on Untapped, and I do see it. It seems like in a quick kind of scroll through recent check-ins, people generally comment more. I like it better on draft. I've seen some sort
yeah,
of
I bet.
comments about maybe all beers better on draft. We'll cover that when we get
Mm,
to packaging and beer 101. I'm sure.
yep.
Um, Another thing I hadn't planned on talking about was first check-ins. I've said I've had this before. My first check-in to this beer was April 2015.
Nice. Wow.
which was the first time I earned the North Carolina Beer Month badge way back when.
In April, and I have yet to have it on Untappd, so I've got to. This will be it. This will be a good badge haul hopefully today. This guy.
Oh man, going back to 2015, like when I would check in and I would earn, like I remember like sharing those out manually to Facebook or Instagram and saying like, scored a 3 badger on this one.
Right.
Now it's a little bit
Uh,
easier to get 3 badges, and you just up it, right? If I can get 6 badges, that's impressive. I think you could probably even plan things out to get maybe even 7 or more now.
sure. Just wait till New Brew Thursday, people.
The badge that never ends.
That's right.
I'll be working on that one forever.
I know.
Um,
Good. All of us together.
well, anyways, Harrison, now sounds like a good time for a climb.
Oh, that's right. We got one beer in us, some liquid courage to take this mountain and summit it. We're heading back to Mount Beermore, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a hot minute since we've looked on these glorious beers we've chosen to pass to kind of highlight what's made our beer journey unique and kind of defined it. And excited to pop some new ones up there today. This is gonna be great.
Yeah, for a recap so far on my own Mount Beermore, I've got Founders All Day,
Mm,
and I think that's the beer I've actually checked in the most too.
yeah.
And Serenax Nitro Disruption, which was I'll credit it as the beer that introduced me to nitro beers, or at least canned nitro
Yep.
beers.
Yep.
What's on yours, Harry?
That's right. I got Allagash White and Sierra Nevada's Pale Ale so far.
Those are, I mean, Serenax Disruption isn't even, you can't even find that anymore. I wish I had more of an iconic beer on
Uh,
there, but so far that's a really good list.
yeah.
If I can say so myself, even
Yes,
though
you
it's
can.
half
You
mine.
can. It's happening.
So we're in, and what I'm putting on is my third Mount Beermore for season 3. Who knows what's going to happen in season 4? Do we just put more faces on the mount? We'll get there. But 3 of 4 so far for the year, and I'm going to do Franziskaner's
Ooh.
wheat beer, which I'm glad to hear your remark of approval on that,
Oh
Harrison.
yeah. Oh yeah.
For
Amazing.
me, I'll equate a lot of beers as like my intro to craft, but I think this was the one that really turned the page for me. I'd gotten a job early on in my life,
Hmm.
doing valet for a hotel in Buffalo, and across the street from the bar was across the street from the hotel was this bar, Century Grill, which was just, it was iconic. It looked like walking into Cheers. And I would, when someone would say, "Oh, where's a good place to go?" I would send them to Century Grill because it was, but also the bartender Adam there knew. So when I would come in, he would usually cover my first beer for me, which we became really good friends. But my first interaction with him after work, a couple of guys from work over, well, let's go to Century, we'll have a pint, and we walk in, and it's like my first time going to like a big city bar, not
Right.
using, I should say, using a real ID. Um,
Yeah.
and so I sit down, and Adam comes up, and he's just smooth as all get up. This uh, professional bartender. What can I get for you, man? And I have no idea. I usually order Bud Light. That's what I grew up drinking. So I said, I'll have a Bud Light. And his eyebrows contort. And he looks at me with this gross disapproval. And he goes, I don't think you want to do that. And I said, I don't know what else to get. There's
Right.
some cool handles there. Maybe that one. And he goes, how about a Franziskaner? And I said, yeah, sure. That sounds neat to say.
Right.
So for 2 years, I ended up going to Century Grill often after work and drinking Franziskaner with Adam. And then eventually he would kind of peel me away, and I would try a new beer. But he was an outstanding bartender, and I don't know if he knew it at the time, but he really helped me understand what it's like to go out and have a good beer. So thanks, Adam, if you're listening.
Yes.
How about you, Harrison?
Yeah, that's a great story, John, and that's an amazing beer. It's one that I came across a lot in Philadelphia. It seemed to be almost everywhere, and one that I remember the first time I had it too, being kind of blown away by just how delicious it was. And the German water, it tastes different, which we can talk about on the water episode. But
You're right. You're right.
but
The carbonation in there was everything about that beer was
sure,
different to me then. Let's be honest. It wasn't a Bud Light, but but it,
right.
yeah. It was
Right,
good.
I
It
know,
was
I
good.
know. It's amazing. For me, if you didn't catch the Easter eggs earlier, I'm adding Old Chub, Oscar Blues Old Chub, their Scotch Ale, to my Mount Beermore, and this was, so one of the first beers, and I've kind of shared this story before. One of the first beers I ever brewed on a homebrew system with a bunch of guys who have been basically had like a nano brewery in their garage. Um, was one of the first ones. The first one, one of the first ones was a Scotch ale that was amazing. I'd never heard of the style before. Never had one, didn't know much about it, brewed it, tried some of his that he had brewed another batch of recently that he had on tap. The guy, Tom Mick, who I learned from, had some of his other Scotch ale. It was delicious. Immediately was like, holy cow, this kind of, there's like whiskey notes happening in here. It's dark like a porter. It was just this whole new world where all of a sudden dark beer was not just a stout or a porter. It could be, or the Newcastle brown ale. It was something else. It became this other
Nuki.
thing. Right. Yeah, it had like a whole other dimension to it. And so like I had a heck of a day, great brew day, made the beer, and then like I realized probably a day or so later, like holy cow, this beer is going to be ready in 3 weeks, and now all I want to do is drink Scotch ales. What do I do? Like where do I go and get a Scotch ale now? How can I kind of fulfill this want I have now of drinking more of this awesome beer I just discovered? And so I went to um, a local bottle shop, I think a deli, no longer exists, unfortunately, that had like walls of coolers full of beer, and built a 6 pack, a mix of six from it, and got Old Chub, Old Orkney's Skull Splitter, which is another Scotch ale, then Great Divide's Claymore, which
Oh
is their
man.
Scotch ale. So like amazing ones. So just kind of ran the gamut, and they're all great, and easily any one of them could have made it on this list today. I just remember it might have been, I might have also gotten a 6 pack Old Chub. I definitely had a lot of it the first time I had it. Maybe I just went all in the 6 pack, but I just remember drinking that beer, how smooth it was. There was something kind of different about it. It was a cold, like winter night. The ABV kind of snuck up on me. It was just like a nice memory tied to that beer, as we've kind of spoken about a lot on Drinking Socially, of just how it's not just about the beer. It's about, as you just said, with the bar across where I used to work. It's that story that goes with it. Nice night. I was watching Crawl, the cult classic Crawl was on in the background as I kind of drank Old Chub quickly, like I would a light lager, because I still
The
had the
cult
right.
classic.
That's right, the cult classic. Um, yeah, no qualifying, no
Yeah, if you
explanation
say it,
needed.
it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, didn't make that '80s best of '80s movie list earlier. I don't know how,
We'll have to
but
talk to Kevin.
but it was cold out. It was warming me up. I was drinking it quicker than I should have, because I was still had that mentality of every beer is a 4% light beer in my head that
Yep.
gets conditioned to you in college. Um, it was just great. It was a really delicious beer. I loved it. And that 6 pack really flew away, and went right down pretty smoothly. So and obviously had our beer a couple weeks later, and it was great. But it just kind of started that whole, just a whole light bulb went off of, again, dark beers are, there's something exciting here, and there's dimensions to them, and there's lots to be learned. And if you can pick that out, if you can sit there and go, well, this is why this brown ale is different than a this ESB, and this, even you can't articulate it, but you can kind of taste like what flavors are more present, or where they land on your tongue, or how it's all kind of making you feel. There's excitement there, much like it would be with what kind of dry hop is this, and all that stuff. I find it there. I find it in yeast. Every part about beer. So we're kind of hearing. It's all got its own fascinating world that is kind of unlocked when you dive deeper into it. And Old Chub was, for me, for dark beers, Old Chub was that beer that kind of just made me want to learn more about them and keep going, and help me discover things like Old Rasputin, which we've done before on the show, um, and Doppelbox, and just kind of seeing what else was out there. That whole world of dark beer was kind of unknown to me, and Old Chub opened it up. And so it easily gets on my Mount Beer more for that alone.
That's a good beer. Every time you add one to yours, I get sad that it's not on mine. But I think, unlike the real Mount Rushmore that we kind of base the idea on, my hope for Mount Beermore and your own, if you're listening, Mount Beermore, is that it's an opportunity to remind yourself on where you are in your craft beer,
Mhm.
portfolio experience, where you are right now, where you were before, and undoubtedly, in 2 years, you may look back and realize that a different beer changed your life. But I like paying homage to the ones that got us where we are today.
Sure. Yeah. It's something we rarely do overall as humans. I think take a moment to look back and kind of see like where that first ripple was, where the stone landed in the lake that got us to where we are now, and tough hard it's hard to do for a lot of things. It's hard to be like, how did I get to this job? Why do I live in this state? How did I get to where I am? A lot of that stuff's tough to track. Fortunate that beer alone and of itself seems to be easier. But then, of course, with Untappd, you jump on there and you're like, oh, this is the actual night I had it. And there's Kroll in the background of my check-in of this beer. Like it's all, and then it all floods back to you. Why do we have that horrible plant in the corner? What light is ancient? Who put those curtains up? Like all these other, things come back and you laugh about what was. So love that part of Untappd, the visual component. I used to be not a big photo taker, but with I do now, especially with the beers. I feel like it just jogs that memory and you go right back to that place. Visually, it's much easier.
Totally. I felt like I learned about Untapped late. It had already existed for 5 years or so when I started using it, but time goes by really fast.
Right.
So,
That's right. That's right.
check in. It's go and occasionally log into Untapped and go back and look through some of your earlier check-ins. And we'll be right back with Harrison bringing in beer number 2 for
Yeah.
episode 14.
Go.
Want to show off your love of Untappd? Check out our online store and pick up Untappd branded glassware, shirts, sweatshirts, hats, more. Depending on how hot or cold you are, go to store.untappd.com and enter the coupon code podcast when you check out. That'll get 20% off anything you order. That's store.untappd.com. Use the coupon code podcast, 20% off for you. Plus, it lets them know that you guys are listening, and we love that here.
All right, wonderful. Well, here we go. We're going to jump right into beer number 2. I'm excited about it. It is Fat Tire from New Belgium Brewing Company, of course. They are defining it as an amber ale, 5.2% ABV, 22 IBUs, and from New Belgium themselves, Fat Tire Amber is the easy drinking amber ale born in Colorado, New Belgium Brewing Company. And it actually lists, which is pretty cool, what is in it. So for the homebrew fans out there, for the beer super fans out there like us, easy to look in here and see what makes this beer taste the way it does, using some great hops, some great malt, a lot of pale malt, C80, which is like caramel 80. 80 is on a scale, denotes the darkness or lightness of it. So it kind of lands, I think you can go as high as like 300, which is just black, dark stuff. But C80, nice kind of amberish color. Munich and Victory, which are two malts we'll talk about today a lot. And then Willamette, Goldings, and Nugget in here. But this beer, as the rest of today, is about the malt more than the hops. So let's get in here. And John's already in.
Sorry, man. I
Good,
uh, I wanted
good,
to I wanted to give you some time to pour your beer, so I figured I'd pour mine first,
smart.
beautifully. This is gorgeous, right? This is exactly what I
Yeah.
think of when I think of an amber ale.
Ooh, much lighter.
Like I
Yeah.
can pretty much read my Untapped check-in through this beer. It's just a little sepia. It's like making an
Ooh,
old-fashioned film.
yeah.
This is
Ooh,
probably the 4th iteration of Fat Tire's label that I've
sure.
drank this beer from, but
Yep.
it's one I don't expect to last long in the glass. We probably should have got 2 of them.
I know. It's going to go down quick,
Was
but
it
that's good.
Maori Mobster? You were right, by a
That's right.
4-pack.
I know. Right. We can listen, we don't learn. Oh man. Well, let's dive into this. This is a classic, unlike
Tru
Crawl, which is
Truly,
debatable.
this is not a cult classic, this is an actual classic.
Ooh, man.
It smells like, I mean, sorry, it smells like beer, though. It smells like
Sure.
beer, like it smells like playing kickball with adults and not wanting to run that fast.
I think it smells like sliding into like first base like an idiot. Is this your first time here? You slide into first? Oh man. But it's
Ah,
yeah, it's it's interesting. It's not the same style as the Green Man's ESB, and it's kind of close. Definitely much lighter, like lighter on the mouthfeel. It's bubbly. You can see right through it. Um, and it's yeah, it's like right. It's got like a toasted note, and then it's very crisp and clean. And there is more malt presence here than I'm getting.
Yeah, they use you read the ingredients. They use an ale yeast in this,
Sure.
and I'm not gonna even gonna pretend I'm a yeast expert, but when I drink if I drank this with my eyes closed,
Oh.
I'd really, really have to, like, sit down and focus on it to tell you that this was, like, a red ale. I mean,
Hmm.
I suppose if I drank it right next to a light lager, I could tell the difference, but this is so clean. If you look at Fat Tire and you think, like, that's not a poolside beer, I would challenge you, drink this by the pool, and you'd probably change
Yeah.
your mind.
I know. For me, this was kind of like an early on a white whale, kind of like if you lived on
Yeah.
the East Coast, this is a beer that everybody talked about, kind of like everyone on the West Coast talks about, like Yingling or whatever. Like it was this beer that every you wanted but could never find. And I remember like for a while, every airport I went into, every airport bar had a Fat Tire like neon sign in the behind it. And I go in there and be like, can I have one? Oh, we don't have it. Like,
Just the
someone did
sign.
really well, right? Just as
Yeah.
really someone at Fat Tire killed it with the marketing years ago. You got those things all over the place, but yeah, so I swung out forever, and then it was released. It came to the Philadelphia market, and I was so excited about it. And we're going to a bar and having my actually, I think I got a six pack of it first. Just had it at the house and being like, oh, I get it. Like it's exciting in the way that like a great grilled cheese is exciting, or a cheeseburger, or like that thing that you love that is not going to be your anniversary dinner with your wife, but it's going to be the thing where you're like, maybe it is sometimes,
Yeah.
but right, we'll see. Depends how
50th
right,
anniversary, yes,
exactly.
not your
Right,
first.
right. Good point. Um, but it's just it's great. Like it's a poolside beer. It's an everyday drinker. It's probably like the maybe the perfect airport beer where you could have one at 10 in the morning or 10 at night and whatever. Like it's not gonna knock you backwards and mess your whole day up, but actually give you some flavor and something enjoyable. Um, man,
So
this thing
true.
is it's great. It really is.
Your comparison to Yingling, which just to prevent us from having to issue a correction, would be an East Coast thing,
Right.
um, but your comparison to Yingling, I think, is spot on. Like I remember I grew up really close to the Pennsylvania border, and like as I aged, my Pennsylvania friends would just never shut up about Yingling, Yingling, and
Sure.
you would think it was like the fountain of youth. It's good, but like it everybody talked about Yingling like it was this unobtainium
Right.
sci-fi
Right.
reference, but
There you go.
and it as I just said, it is a great beer. But Fat Tire is, I think, a reasonable equivalent to that.
Yep.
What's cool about it is that you see beers like Fat Tire pop up, which are almost a national brand now.
Sure. Oh
But at
yeah.
the time, those were a source of pride, and especially with New Belgium, they were for the longest time like really green. They were, I think, each employee was like a shareholder or
Yep.
employee-owned
Sure.
co-op
Oh
type. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that was a
Employee owned.
beautiful. You should be proud of that.
Yeah, employee owned company for many years, and yeah, but yeah, it was kind of right. It was just that one of those beers that wasn't around nationally yet, and if people that on the other side of the country that could get it would brag about it all the time, and you had to sit at home and go, "Ooh hoo, I wish I was there."
Yep.
So pumped that we can kind of. I mean, it's almost. I think it's in every state in the U.S. now, and a lot of places overseas. I mean, when you look at it on Untapped, you're getting check-ins, all over the world from this beer, and that's as it should be. I mean, this is one of the beers that you should kind of is a great flagship for American craft beer and what it's all about, and where it's been, and again how good it is. I mean, if you listen to the podcast before, I can talk all day about how great Sierra Nevada is, and that one of the things I think that makes them great is how consistent they are. And the same thing can be said about New Belgium. That like these beers they make, it tastes the same every time you have it, and that's impressive. And it's again, this is a very straightforward beer. There's nothing to hide behind.
Thank
This is a
you.
well-made beer. It has to be really well made, and in order to taste as good as it does. You can't hide behind a wall of hops or some crazy yeast that it's supposed to taste like Sour Patch Kids. Like all that stuff is not here. It's just a straightforward beer drinker's beer, if you will, which I am. But yeah, it's awesome. They did a new rebrand too. Cans look great, bottle looks great. But it's yeah, it's one that again, it was I'm pumped. I was excited the first time I had it, and like instantly kind of got like right, like you said, John. It wasn't this unobtainium. It was like, oh, this is your comfort beer. This is your every football game beer. This is your happy place beer.
Yep.
And
If
now
you're
I
looking
kind of get a
for
sense of that.
strawberry, raspberry, lactose milkshake, this isn't the beer that you'll find, but if you do find a fat tire, I think there's as Harrison alluded to, like there you have to be so on par with your metrics to
Yeah.
build a beer as simple as this. Like
Yep.
your illusion was perfect, where you can't just throw a whole bunch of apple pie in there and hide behind. And I'm not knocking apple pie
Right.
brewers, I love
Sure.
them, but to do something simple, to cook a dinner with 4 ingredients is a lot harder than cooking a dinner with a whole pantry. That
Right.
analogy probably applies, but I
Yeah.
think
It
it's
does. Yeah.
meritorious that you bring that up. If you drink this beer, you're not gonna get a super cutting edge trendy lemonade or anything like that, but you're gonna get a taste of arguably perfection or really close to it.
Yeah. There's really, as it kind of warms up a slightly, there's like this. It finishes in almost like a honey note that goes into a fruity note coming from the hops. That's like it's like it almost feels like when you're breathing in like a deep forest after a rain, John. There's like something very evergreeny about it that's kind of exciting. It's very slight. But it's as I just finished it there, it almost felt like I was just kind of smelling the morning dew somewhere
I wish we
uh, in an
had
old growth forest.
podcast to like just
uh,
draw Harrison in the woods smelling
mhm.
in his beer.
Just right.
I didn't realize it until you said it, but that honey transitioning into fruit,
Mm,
like honey has, it's a very umami-y
right.
sweetness to it, where there's a base kind of guttural sweetness that comes with honey. In like I didn't know it was in this beer until you mentioned it, and when you did, my next sip, I was like, oh my god,
Ah,
there it is.
ah, Inception. Yeah, no, but yeah, it's there. It's jumping out. Oh man, it's almost like right. We wish we had more of them to kind of take time and enjoy because it's so easy to drink um, through relatively quickly. Sitting with it for a bit though, as I'll start to do now. Um, it's giving me even more of an experience as it warms up. It opens up a little bit. And to our point, as I look on Untappd here,
I can tell Harrison's been drinking
I'm
it.
burping, and here we go.
It's
It's all
getting the
happening. It's making
situation.
right, making room for more. Excuse me. Um, the so Fat Tire's been checked in more than a million times
That's
by
impressive.
half a million, half more than half a million people. I've had it on Untappd 5 times, which seems low, but I'll take it. And as of recording this, the most recent check-in from Jeff, checking into Untappd at home, says used to really enjoy this back in the day. So he's doing the same thing we are, of kind of revisiting a beer that it has some memories for him. And it's easy to do, and it's easy to do that with this beer.
Man, going to Untapped, the if you go to the beer page on Untapped, and I'll admit I use Untapped on a desktop as much as I do on my cell phone, but if you
Yep.
go to the beer page, the loyal drinker is an Untapped user named GLL, but
Mm,
748 times they've checked into Fat Tire.
wow.
That's a commitment. You can see they've done like whiskey barrel aged and Fat Tire on Amarillo. They did a Funk Tire, so it's cool to kind of see
Yeah.
some of those other variants listed on the page
Hmm.
from New Belgium
That's right.
and the check-ins. I'm looking at a picture from Amy who checked into this just a few hours ago as we're recording, and she doesn't have a picture of the beer, but she does have a picture of her beautiful pup on a beach, and I'm led to assume she's drinking the beer there as well. Which is, I mean, that's Amy. You're having a great day.
Love it. And when I look at my friend feed, let me see. Monica Gleed, she had Fat Tire. What was that? Probably yeah, about, earlier in the month of June. and check in. Had an Untappd Tihu glass, sick pick. Had it says Fat Tire Friday, which used to be, I think it was a badge for a little bit on Untappd, and it was a thing that Fat Tire used to do all the time as like kind of like a promotion to some of their accounts of like Fat Tire Friday, $5 fat tires all day or whatever it was based on where you had it. But that brought back even more memories. I remember that. That was I think part of their launch in Philadelphia was like, if you carry us, we're gonna do Fat Tire Fridays all around the city to help promote the brand and yada yada yada. And that was kind of like that whole summer was, where are we going to get fat tires? It's Friday. Let's go get started off with the fat tire this weekend.
Kip's an untapped friend of mine, Kip D, is doing even better. He's checking into the Marriott in Nashville. Sorry, Kip, if I'm blowing up your spot, but my bad. Kip says in his check-in, two for free hotel beer. Hard to believe this is my
Ah,
first Fat Tire check-in. Cheers, everyone.
there you go.
That's awesome. On
Yeah,
occasion, I would get like a cookie when I checked in, or usually like
right.
the pillow mint.
Pillow pint. Yes.
Putting a beer in my room is a great way to make sure that I become a strong brand ambassador
Right.
for your
I,
hotel chain.
yeah. I wonder if that just that fridge didn't get cleaned out in between visitors and kind of leave behind for
Holy
the next
cow!
visitor.
Raise your hand if you've ever left beers in your hotel
Sure.
room after you realize
Sure.
you can't bring them home with
I
you.
was gonna say, right, not going on the plane, so whatever. The rest of this six pack is someone's lucky day, and there
Yep,
it goes.
yep. You go out to dinner and they're like, "Oh, do you wanna take it home?" I'm living in a hotel tonight, I won't
Right.
I'll take it home.
I'll
I
take it
may
home.
eat it. I'm just going to bed and then I'm going to work in the morning, but there
Right.
may be a chance I eat it. I'm probably
That's right.
gonna end up
That's
throwing it
right.
away and feel
I'll
terrible.
probably forget it on top of the fridge and then want it tomorrow morning, but it'll be bad by then. That's
I'll
you
still
got
be
yeah,
I'll eat it
right.
on the way to the airport. It'll be fine. Yeah.
Go ahead, put it in the bag. You got it. You got any mints? Oh, I know.
Uh, airport I don't wanna detract, but I wanted to bring this up, and I'm just gonna interject and do it. You mentioned drinking this in an airport. I think
Yeah.
that's a good question to poise. What's your airport beer? And it
Ooh,
also leads into maybe a
this
romantic
one.
finish for season 3. Probably not, but wouldn't it be cool if we finished the season at Chicken and Beer at the Atlanta airport,
That's right.
which has
Still
earned so
holding
many.
strong.
Yeah.
Right. Amazing place for badge undrinking socially badge unlocks. They're crushing it there. Um, Good on you guys. Clearly some killer beer, if I do say so myself. But yeah, that would be. I mean, we gotta. You're right, John. Or maybe we're revealing behind the curtain, but that's a good. Got to do that. We got to get there someday.
You heard it here first, but don't hold us to it
Yeah,
because going
please
to the
don't.
Atlanta airport just to drink a beer, I don't know if I don't
Sounds
I don't
expensive.
it sounds like I at least need TSA pre-check or
Right.
States maybe. So,
Right. We could
maybe
though.
not, but
God, we could do that. We could fly to Atlanta, then fly back, and
can
just
we
have a
green
beer.
screen chicken and beer, like, grab a photo from an Untappd check-in and use,
Probably
like,
could.
Greg's green screen from the fest?
That's
Anyways.
right. Probably could. There are possibilities there. Technology, amazing. We'll see what happens though. We'll see. We'll see where a seed has been planted today. We'll see what comes of it.
Harrison is a forest of seedlings of
Right.
wisping will. Do you
I
want to
can
talk
smell
about
them.
malt?
Smell
Are
them
you
all in here. Yeah, let's do that. That's right. Let's get into the beer 101 section of this and actually start hashing some stuff out. That's a great idea, John. Let's do it.
This is the hop we did this beer 101 is this is part 2 of an arbitrary 10-part series. The last season was sorry, last episode was hops. And Harrison and we kind Harrison did most of the educating, and I asked him questions about hops, and it was well received. We got great feedback from those of you that sent in emails, send them to podcast at Untappd. We'll put all the links in the show notes, but emails, Facebook questions. It was outstanding to hear people's feedback, and we have at our disposal Harrison, who spent his early formative years
Mm.
grinding, working day and night to learn everything there is about brewing. And as soon as you turn your back, the sport moves on without you. But
Right. That's right.
I think it's incredibly valuable to have you here on the podcast and be able to share some of that knowledge, so that when the next young John Dispenza walks into Century Grill, you can't; it's closed.
Right.
But when the next one, you understand when Adam, the bartender, says we don't have that beer. You're educated and you can answer some intro questions about malt. And if I know Harrison, he's going to get into the 300
Uh,
levels as well.
we'll start rambling right into the 300 level classes. That's right, John. But we'll
So
try not to. We'll see what happens.
let's start with 101, Brewing 101, Section 2, Malt. Harrison, most of our listeners at this point know that beer generally equals a combination of water, hops, malt, and yeast. So let's start at the beginning. Can you give us a little history on how malt found its way into beer as we know it today?
Sure, yeah. So dating like the starting point of malted barley, or malt as we can call it today, it's impossible. Kind of all over the ancient world, historians and archaeologists have found different jugs full of beer and malted barley, and storage rooms for malted barley and things like that. All over from Egypt to Asia, Mesopotamia, all over the world. But really, kind of some of the more concrete stuff you start to see a written record of started about 4,000 plus years ago in Egypt, where they kind of had like a system in place for malting barley to make beer. Before that, though, you were using honey and other sources of fermentable sugars. That's the goal here, and why we're using barley today, and why it really took off is it's an easy source for to create sugars that are fermentable by yeast. And some historians argue that like a real driver for modern civilization as we know it, like towns and cities and houses and things like that, happened because of beer. Tribes that were nomadic needing to settle down in one place to plant their grain to make more beer. Tough to be roaming around and chasing woolly mammoths if you also want to have alcoholic beverages. So, interestingly enough, according to some pretty well-known historians, that's kind of what caused a lot of people to settle down, not just for beer, but obviously once you kind of discover you can grow and harvest grain, it can feed you too. But beer is a really big part of culture. Ancient religions, all that stuff. Beer was the center point of it, and other as wine was too. Really, the name spirits comes from like the early days in spontaneous fermentation, where some wet grain would fall in a bucket. Someone would drink it. The goat would drink it. The goat would be flopping around all over drunk, and you're like, hey, that guy likes having a blast. What's he drinking? And the first happy hour is born. So, um, so because it seemed as magic. It seemed kind of like this mysterious thing. People didn't really understand what was happening, and then they did. And really, again, the Egyptians are kind of the first to really identify that and create a system that we know anyway of actually germinating and malting grain and to the end of making beer itself. And then it grew through the 1500s and so to now, where you're using things like corn and other grains to based on where you are in the world and what's available or what you can plant based on the soil. You can make beer out of a lot of different cereal grains, which is what brewers kind of refer to all the grains you can put in a beer that'll actually do something,
So
which is pretty cool.
not all malt is just like two-row barley. It can
Right.
be other cereal grains. You
Yeah.
you mentioned sugars a lot. Which obviously is helpful in making alcohol.
Yeah.
When we cover fermentation later on, when it comes to malting barley, can you kind of help me understand like why is that important? Why can't I just like grab the barley and throw it
Right.
in and make
Sure.
beer?
Sure. And yeah, and a lot of it is that the moisture of the water would help, and then opening that up into the air and air drying this stuff would cause germination to happen, which would change kind of a lot of the starches, or begin that process of changing the starches that are naturally inside these grains into what would become fermentable sugars, kind of breaking them down a bit so that they're easier for for yeast to eat and then create alcohol and CO2. And this is where, yeah, again, like the historical record shows Egypt really excelling, where they had a whole system of kind of malting in these sacks. They put in the water, they'd pull it out of the streams a certain height, and based on like, they would even raise certain sacks certain different heights based on like the yield they wanted out of that grain, that you get a lot of starch and make more alcoholic stuff for less starches and sugars, and maybe make a lower alcoholic options. They were doing that at like that level. Everything was and then they would get, yeah, kind of kiln dry it, put it in basically a big stove, and dry it quickly that way, so that it could be actually crushed and then and used in the brewing process. But very cool records of them kind of actually doing this and having a system in someone's job or people's jobs were to, germinate all this grain to the ends of making a bunch of beer for everyone to enjoy.
That's okay. I love where this is going. Real historical. Let's fast forward a little bit, where now we kind of live in a world
Mm,
where I use Untappd to check in my beers and learn
right.
about them. We've got industrial revolution happen. We've
Yep.
got production. So how has malt? Maybe it hasn't. Let me know, and we'll skip to the next question. But how has
Right.
malt kind of adapted and changed over the last 50 or even the last 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that it hasn't really much that recently. Like the biggest change from kind of, okay, we're bootstrapping this and we're making this ourselves in our town, in our city, kind of figuring it out thousands of years ago. Fast forward to the 17th century, where floor malting became kind of commonplace, where you would just take that same malt that was wet, lay it down on the floor, and let it air dry, as you kind of moved it about with shovels and rakes and things, and let it air dry naturally that way. And that was like the only way to do it uh, for almost the entire century. Kind of laying these steeped barley in piles on concrete floors. And they kind of naturally build up heat from being stored together, being inside, begin that growth of germination, and then yeah, spread apart after that to allow it to aerate and then germinate. So it was pretty labor intensive, but that's how a lot of malt houses still do it. There have been some modern adaptations where you have, like obviously ventilation systems where you can control like when it's hot and when it's cold, as opposed to waiting for like the nighttime or a certain time of year, or that sort of thing. Allows the malt to be produced quicker, more accuracy. You have modified malts that are kind of malted in a certain way to produce more fermentable sugars, by malting different ways that a lot of breweries will use if they're trying to get like really high ABV beers, and things like that. So there are some changes, but I would argue that really for the past, since the 1800s, or if not the 1600s, it's really been that floor malting technique has not changed much since then, and it's what most malt houses still do today.
That's outstanding. I mean, that's honestly that's really surprising as well.
Yeah, yeah,
That you're still using like a wooden shovel or maybe an aluminum shovel, but
right.
the process is still kind of the way it was for so long ago.
Yeah,
That's really cool for me to think about. But
yeah,
let's not do
sure.
that. Let me ask you
I know.
another
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Now that we're kind of to the point where we can understand malt commonly is like a malted barley, but can also include other things. So now that we kind of know what malt is, the term, how does malt help us make beer? How does it work?
Sure. So yeah, so after that barley has been malted and it's ready to go, it'll be well, sometimes dehusked, but put into a machine that'll separate it from the actual. Actually, this happens kind of during the malting process. Separate it from the um, what it's actually growing on, like the stem, and put it in 50-pound bags usually, and that sort of your brewery. And you're going to put that in a mill and crack that grain husk open so that it reveals all the starches inside it, that you're going to be using in the brewing process to actually make alcohol. And that's, you set those mills ahead of time. You don't want to be grinding it into like fine dust, but you want to be cracking enough of those husks and hulls that you're opening them up actually, so that the, the yeast can down the line access the stuff they need to make alcohol. It goes into an auger, which is basically a fancy conveyor belt, usually in the ceiling. It drops into a mash tun, where it meets water at a certain temperature. It's usually around like 158 degrees Fahrenheit. That's based on the recipe, though. And you start mashing that beer in by mixing the grain and the hot water, and then letting it basically steep for between 30 minutes to more than an hour, again based on the recipe. But that's step one to any beer, is you gotta mash in with all the malt you have now.
And is that where we get the term wort? Well, maybe not the term, but effectively.
Sure, yeah. Beer is not beer until it's fermented. Up until that point, it's wort, WORT. So yeah, when you mash out, so you mash in by mixing all the stuff together, but you don't want to be boiling grains most of the time. So you have to separate the now liquid wort from those grains and put it in your brew kettle, and that's the next step. Uh, Usually, sometimes you do something called vorlaughing or recirculating, which is a lot of fun, where you use the grain bed itself and send the beer, the wort, excuse me, back through it. It's a natural filter, so it'll help clear up that beer and make it look really nice even before you boil it, even before it's actually beer. You're doing that early on in the process, and then transfer it into your brew kettle where you boil it, and then you start adding hops and move on to the next part of the process. But yeah, it's yeah, that's where you actually make it. You make that kind of sugary. It's very sweet. I mean, if you ever had like wort, you would think it would be. Obviously, that sugar is going to become alcohol, and the sweetness will disappear most of it will because of that down the line. But it's very sweet a lot of the time. The actual wort itself before it starts boiling.
Yeah, I was gonna say the process of mashing in, thinking about the different grains that you can use. I know that it smells amazing, but
It does.
it's effectively like you make oatmeal. I know,
Yeah.
but and then you
Oh
either
yeah.
eat the oatmeal or you turn it into beer, which is kind of magical. And I don't mean to bastardize it, but
Oh, that's
I know it's
absolutely right.
more than that. But effectively, the beginning of making beer, you're extracting the sweetness and the sugar from these malted
Hmm.
grains, which is incredible at its core that it can be kind of simplified like that. Are there what other types of grains have you used, Harrison, or like can
Sure.
be malted and used to build up a beer's wort?
Yeah, so we would use all kinds of stuff. We use a lot of wheat, a lot of rye, oats. We would use rice, and then rice. We use rice hulls. We actually never put rice in a beer, but that is a common practice. And then corn. We had a great cream ale that we used a lot of man, flaked corn in. That was a blast. It was fun. It was very simple to make. It was mostly like almost 100% of the grain bill was like pale malt, and there was some corn in it. It was very simple. One of our favorite beers as brewers to drink was our cream ale, and making it was not the worst. But that corn, you would have to manually add it with those 50-pound bags yourself in the mash tun. It wouldn't go through the conveyor belt because it did not need to be milled. It was already rolled, as opposed to being milled. You can do that for other malts that you don't want to crack. You don't need to crack them because they already have enough protein on them, or they've been torrefied, which is like another way of basically heating them up to expose those grains, or rolled. So you're kind of cracking them like for oats and wheat through a huge roller, and therefore don't need to be milled. That that potential sugar is already exposed, and you can add those things usually later in the mash. You'll add them kind of last as you're mashing and mixing stuff up, because it can really gum it up and really make it very oatmeal-y. What helps with that, though, um, preventing that from happening, so you don't get what's called a stuck mash, where you've got way too much starch and sugar in there that none of the liquid can actually move through your mash kettle and get to the brew kettle, are rice hulls. So not rice, but rice, if you didn't know, doesn't grow like it looks like in the bag in the store. It comes in like a tiny little hull that people have to, now machines have to separate. And so when they get separated, those hulls, breweries get them. They come in huge bags, and we would have like probably for a brew day, like 5-gallon buckets, 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets full of rice hulls that we would sprinkle in kind of throughout the because they had no flavor. There's no flavor to them. There's no sugar on them. It's just a simple. It's just fiber. There's nothing to it. There's no calorie contribution at all. Um, uh, to your grain bill, so that the water can move through it. It kind of creates these channels inside the grain that allows it to the wort and the water to move through it easily, so you're not getting stuck with a basically a big old bowl of oatmeal that you can't move, that later you have to jump in and dig out yourself in
Is that
hot,
what the
gross.
giant brew spoons are for?
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Those are something different. That's something totally different. It's all for the giant jars of peanut butter at the back of each brewery. That's what the spoons are for. But this one, yeah. So, yeah, rice hulls were a huge, like, it was, if we when you run out of rice hulls, which happened, you'd be like, great. I hope today doesn't take 9 hours to do a 3-hour job, but it might.
That sound. I imagine anybody listening, maybe it's not rice holes, but you know what that element of your
Right,
job is. It's like,
exactly.
man, if Gmail goes down today, it's going to take
That's
twice or
right.
whatever. Like,
Exactly. Where are the carrier pigeons? We can't
yeah.
get them quick enough. My day is over.
Did you receive my pigeon? I didn't get a read receipt. Um, what about flavor? So
Mm,
anybody that's drank a beer recently will probably attribute a lot of the flavor to the hops, which we kind of
sure.
talked about earlier. Um, how does malt affect the flavor of my beer? Is it just like a hop? Is it? Let me stop answering the question for you. How does malt alter my beer?
Right. And this is what we were talking about earlier, pointing that nose of the ship a half degree one way or another, and you end up in Hawaii instead of San Francisco. So, and this is where malt comes in. It's more than just a sequence tracksuit. It's the man running in it, and which way is he going to go? Malt is that man, that jazz handy tracksuit wearing man. To be more clear, uh, most beers, so like, are 70% or more of their base malt is a simple pale malt, a lightly kilned or lightly malted grain that's pale to the touch and pale in sight rather. And if you just added that to your beer, you'd have like a yellow beer. It wouldn't look so. And the difference between a pale ale and a stout is that like 30% of grain that is specialty malt. So it's not a lot of that beer, of that grain bill determines, or rather, there's you can again very few changes contribute to a huge final product, a huge change in a final product between again a pale ale and a stout, or an IPA and a Belgian saison, or whatever it is you're actually consuming. It's going to be mostly the biggest kind of exception here is German Hefeweizens have to be 50% wheat minimum, but almost every other style, I mean, I would say 70% is generous. Most are like 80% pale malt, especially a lot of the IPAs. They're more of 90% pale malt, and they got some wheat and oats in there, and that's it. That's your whole beer, and then the hops kind of take it the rest of the way. So yeah, again, slight changes in Victory, or which is a specialty malt that gives lots of great biscuity flavors, as does Vienna malt and Munich. A lot of bread notes come from that, like freshly baked bread. If you add just a little bit more of it, it changes the entire beer. An example I like to give is that we brewed a pale ale called John, JAWN, at Neshaminy Creek, which is funny if you live around Philadelphia, but everyone else is like, okay, cool name. But um,
That's
but
accurate.
but it was my favorite beer we made. I absolutely loved it. It's like 5.5%. You could drink it. It was my after day beer almost every day. But we were after shift beer rather. We would so there it was about a 900-pound grain bill each time we made it, and we put some Victory malt in it to just kind of give it a single biscuity note, kind of just bring that out slightly, leading into the hop bomb that it really was. It was a double dry hop pale ale. It was amazing. It
Sounds
still
good.
is.
Yep.
Oh man, I miss it. And it stood for Juicy Ale with Nugget, JAWN. It was like an acronym for that. So there's lots of nuggets in it and hops, as well as lots of other stuff. But anyway, that's a whole other silly Philadelphia centric story. But yeah, so of those 900 pounds of malt, this victory malt that was like such a noticeable note, that biscuit just kind of hits right in the front. It was only 30 pounds of it. So almost nothing, none of that grain bill was, and there was one other, especially malt, I think maybe two, but the rest was all this just pale two row base malt. But that, and I remember one day we kind of ran out of victory, or no, ran out of one of the other specialty malts, and someone said, "Should we just add more victory?" And the head brewer was like, "No," like big wide eyed, kind of like 4 alarm fire, like, "Do not add more of that. That is the perfect amount of victory for that beer. If you add more, it's gonna be like you could see in his eyes the way he was kind of describing it. Like we had just said, like, you know, we lost the garbage can. Can we just throw all the garbage on the road? Like it was just like a ridiculous idea to him that we would do this stuff. And but was doing a good job at calmly explaining, like, do not do that, do this instead, or wait to brew it tomorrow, or I don't remember what he actually ended up doing, but it kind of stuck with me of his reaction to it. And then through the years, brewing more and learning more and seeing with other brewers, it's this these specialty malts. It really just changes everything. So it does not take much on the specialty malt side of things. Really change the experience you're having in your glass. That is one example, but and again, especially with victory malt, that thing is it's powerful. And he's
That's
absolutely right. Like if you're a pale ale
30
guy,
30
yeah,
pounds and 900. That's like 3% of your
right,
grain build that
right,
made that difference. That's
yeah,
incredible.
that's it. I know, and it's an amazing malt, but it is extremely intense and powerful. And he was right, obviously right to say all those things. But to someone kind of starting out, it was like, oh, okay,
Not a big deal. I got this.
you got it. Let's throw a couple more pounds in there. Don't you dare.
So so there's I'm going to diverge a little bit, but
Yeah,
there's so you got something where like 3% of your grain build can make a really big, like the difference between 3 to 4% can make a really big difference in your final product.
yeah.
Is it that simple question, air quotes, is it that similar to doing hops where like if you add let's say 10 pounds of hop per barrel, as is often quantified, what if I did
Right.
11 pounds of hop? Is that going to make as big of a difference subjectively as making a change to my grain build?
So I would, oh man, hops are so it's interesting. So hops are right, as we kind of said earlier, everybody loves them, marketing and exciting, cool names. But as a brewer, you know that like you can swap if you run at a Centennial, you can swap in like Mount Hood. That's a comparable hop that will or Cascade rather. It's comparable hop to Cascade. Mount Hood is so there's lots, and that's almost every hop. It has like a counterpart to it. Whereas it's really interesting. We have this kind of obsession in the beer world of hops and specific hops, and I like this one, and maybe I don't like this one. But in the background, the breweries, maybe swapping hops out based on availability all the time for beers you drink and are like, oh, this basically tastes the same as it did last time. It's more pronounced. The change, rather, if you were to swap out like a hop that's a later edition hop, as we talked about before, that really imparts the flavor of that beer, the later you add it into the boil, that may be more noticeable. But we would use a lot of breweries will stick to um, a single hop they use as their bittering hop for all their beers that they add early into the brew for all of them. A pale ale IPA doesn't matter. Even like a lager, they may throw that a little bit in there and just as a single hop charge, but it's the same hop, and then mess around with stuff they finish up with. So it depends when you add it in the actual brew. It depends if it's a dry hop or not. It depends on also hops have, I would say, argue much more variability year to year, farm to farm, and region to region than malt does. Pale ale two row malt, I can't distinguish the difference between one that's grown in Kansas and in the UK and Germany. I mean, there's some you can, but most of the time it's a pale ale malt, and if this guy runs out of it, I can get it from this guy, and that's not going to do much of a drop off. So long way of saying that, like, I think there's even more flexibility and more variability you can get away with as a brewer with your hops than you could that maybe people really realize, and it won't affect the end result of the beer as much as maybe people think, because there are lots of hops that are interchangeable with each other. Yeah, so you can kind of mess around with it, and maybe people won't notice.
That's that's I think important to realize where like oftentimes I'll hear people say like, "Oh, I don't like Amarillo." And that's fair if you just drank a single hop Amarillo pale
Right,
ale and you
right,
realize you
right. You
react,
don't
but
like it,
Galaxy gets it a lot for people that tell me they don't like a specific hop. It
sure.
may as well be malt related, but from the sounds of it, it seems like most beers are primarily pale malt with just a little nudge in
Hmm.
one direction or the other with some
Right,
specialty malts.
right.
And so this is a transition, but the last question I had prepared for you, and we haven't talked about it yet. So I'll ask you just to kind of give me your briefest synopsis of what extract is. But the question
Mm,
is, if you and I were going to brew a beer in my garage tonight,
yeah,
and we were building a recipe, would you want to use extract for that or grain? Is there, I mean, if we're home brewing, I'm going to take professional
sure,
brewing out of the equation.
sure.
But you hear if you type in Google homebrew extract, you're going to get versus grain almost immediately. Is
Yeah.
there a big difference, or what is the big difference, or kind of pros and cons in brewing with extract versus like a real grain, or is there a way to do kind of a little of both?
A little bit of both. Right. Yeah. So, what John's talking about, extract versus all grain, is oftentimes, and this is how the first brew I made on my stovetop, this is the case. Early in your homebrewing career, you probably brew a lot of extract beers. Extract just means that a company has extracted basically like a sugary syrup from a bunch of malted grains. They're doing that process for you of malting it, milling it, boiling it, concentrating it down, put it in a can, or turn it into like a dry powder, and then put it in your homebrew store. Your homebrew shop stocks it. So, and it takes care of that 70 to 80% of the grain bill. But it kind of, as we were talking about, yes, you could make a beer that's like just like two row malt extract, but you'd want to add most of the time at least one or two specialty malts to it to give it a little bit of character. And that's where a partial malt or partial mash, partial grain, as they're all interchangeable terms, brewing comes in, which is what most people end up doing the first time they brew anyway, where you'll get like a can or a bag, depending on if it's liquid malt extract or dry malt extract of malt extract. That's again 70-80% of that grain bill, and then probably like a couple little baggies of some other actual grains, and like a cheesecloth bag to put those in. So they'll probably tell you to like um, boil the malt extract, or heat it up. Actually, for partial grains, they'll say put this in the bag, put it in there, heat it up. As it's heating up, basically make a tea with those specialty grains, and then before it boils, add the malt extract as well. So you're gonna probably be doing a little bit of both. Even if it's your first brew day, kind of steeping some grains in some water along with your malt extract. That will do most of the work for you, provide most of the sugars, all that stuff. For me, though, I mean, I think I only did three or so malt extract brews. As I said before, I was lucky to get kind of roped in with a bunch of guys who had some pretty serious equipment early on in my home brewing experience, which quickly turned into real like commercial brewing very quickly after that. So I was lucky there, and I didn't have to deal with malt extract much. But kind of the general consensus is it's great. You can make great beer with malt extract. There's nothing at all wrong with it. Don't let that be a deterrence from you taking up home brewing. Jump in. You're going to make some really cool beer, and it's going to be easy to do. Um, but inevitably, as soon as you fall in love with it, you're going to, like most things, you hobby over. You're going to want more control over it, want to dive deeper into the granular parts of it to make it exciting and interesting. And then you've been hooked into the all grain train and get ready to spend $2,000 on some ridiculous piece of equipment that lives in your garage and is the cause of 90% of your disagreements with your significant other. So, but it's okay. It's all right. It's okay. We're all there with you. Relax, have a homebrew. You'll be fine. But yeah. So
That's
again,
that,
malt extract's great, but all grain is it just gives you, for me, also it gives you that feeling of like, right, I'm back in the brew house. It feels like it, smells like it, it looks like it. You don't let anyone kid you. If you have a nice all grain setup, you can make as good a beer as any brewery. And I'll challenge anyone who disagrees with that. I can, if they don't agree, I can show you how to do it.
I'm excited for when we get to the homebrew section of Beer 101. If you're on the fence about home brewing, Harrison, myself, and a lot of active and amazing homebrewers are in the Facebook group. I'm always really excited when someone approaches me and says, "Hey, here's an unmarked bottle with a cap that
Right.
I put on myself from a beer that's been in my closet for 3 weeks. Do you want to try
Right.
it?" The answer is
Right.
absolutely.
Give me some of that.
Um, and hopefully some of this kind of uh, maybe even made you ask more questions. If you do
Yeah.
have more questions, find us in our Facebook group. Send an email to podcasts at untappd.com. Or check the show notes. That'll be the easiest way, and then just click the email button in there. But let us know, what questions do you have about beer? What's coming up in the next episode, Harrison?
Yeah, so we're gonna jump over right into water next for our next beer 101 segment. Focus on water, which is, I could argue every one of these is the most important ingredient, but and I'll do that again next week, or in 2 weeks about water. We'll run to that, and we'll feature two new beers that we're going to announce actually early on the Facebook group. That was a great idea that came to us from David inside the Facebook group. So we're going to start doing that now. Actually, share with you guys before we record the next episode, or a drink. So if you want to drink along with us, that'll be the thing to do. And what else, John?
Well, other than that, make sure that you're subscribed to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love it if you left a review. I'd love it more if you left a good review, but it's up to you. But being subscribed to the Drinking Socially podcast, even if it's on YouTube, that's the best way to make sure you get a notification or an update when a new show comes out. We welcome you to contribute to the show and more as we kind of set our sights on ways to keep adapting the show into a little bit more of an interactive experience. And if you want to see Harrison actually drink along with some of these beers,
Mm.
it's amazing the amount of foam that arrives in his mustache, which
Right.
probably doesn't translate audibly.
Yep.
Check us out on YouTube. Just go into YouTube, type Drinking Socially, type
Right.
Untappd. You'll see the Untappd channel in there. Or again, check the show notes,
That's right.
which will be available at podcast.untappd.com. Again, if you have questions, feedback, concerns, homebrew recipes, you want to drink with Harrison, sorry, bud. His calendar's full, but we can schedule something if you're in the Wilmington area. Connect with Untappd directly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Connect with Harrison and myself right at our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/drinking socially.
And other than that, we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We got a little bit left in this one.
Not much, but there it goes.